Hello 8th graders and happy Friday. Today we're going to talk about congruence and corresponding angles. Let's dive right in. Let's start with our do now. Look at number 1. Is that a translation, reflection, or rotation? That's a reflection. I can see that in the original point S is facing the y-axis, and also in the image point S is facing the y-axis. Let's look at number 2. Is that a translation, reflection, or rotation? That's a translation. The shape has simply moved. Look at number 3. Translation, reflection, or rotation? That's a rotation. Now let's find some unknown angle measures. Remember that all of the angles on a straight line add up to 180 degrees. So for number 4, 62 plus 52 plus x equals 180. I need to start by adding 62 plus 52. What's 62 plus 52? It's 114. Now I can subtract from 180 to find the missing angle measure. What's 180 minus 114? 10 minus 4 is 6. 7 minus 1 is 6. The missing angle is 66 degrees. Now you try one. What's the value of x in number 5? X is 95 degrees. 30 plus 35 plus 20 is 85. 180 minus 85 is 95. Now let's look at some triangles. Remember, the angles of a triangle also add up to 180 degrees. So, to find angle J, I can add 65 plus 40 and then subtract from 180. What's 65 plus 40? 65 plus 40 is 105. What's 180 minus 105? 10 minus 5 is 5. 7 minus 0 is 7. The answer is 75 degrees. Now you try one. What is angle Q for number 7? 110 plus 35 is 145. 180 minus 145 is 35. Angle Q is 35 degrees. Now let's look at angle 8. Find the unknown angle. What's the relationship between 71 degrees and x? They are alternate interior angles, which means that they are congruent, or the same. So what's the value of x? It's 71 degrees. Now look at number 9. What's the angle relationship between 115 and x? Those are same-side exterior angles, so they're supplementary. They add up to 180 degrees. So subtract 180 minus 115 to find x. What's 180 minus 115? Well, 10 minus 5 is 5. 7 minus 1 is 6. X is 65 degrees. Today we're going to talk about congruent figures. Two shapes are congruent if they are the same size and shape. That means all the angles and all the sides are equal. Two shapes can be proven to be congruent if you can map one onto the other using a rigid transformation, a translation, a rotation, or a reflection. So let's look at these two figures that are congruent. What transformations could you use to map triangle QOP onto triangle TVU? Well, you would need to rotate it. So it would be a rotation. We call points that have the same position in the two figures corresponding. So what point corresponds to Q? I can look and see that Q is a point next to a 103 degree angle. T corresponds to Q because it has the same angle. What point corresponds to O? V corresponds to O. What point corresponds to P? U corresponds to P. What line segment corresponds to OP? So I need to look for the line that's the exact same as O to P. If V corresponds to O and U corresponds to P, then VU is the line segment that corresponds to OP. What line segment corresponds to QP? Well, TU is the line that runs 15 kilometers from the 103 degree angle to the 49 degree angle. So TU corresponds to QP. Which line segment corresponds to QO? Well, if T corresponds to Q and V corresponds to O, then TV corresponds to QO. We can also identify congruent sides and congruent angles by seeing which correspond. First, let's think which transformation maps EFGH onto SRQT. It's another rotation. Now let's look at these statements and determine if they are true. An equal sign with this line above it that curves means two things are congruent. They're the same size and shape. Is FE congruent to TQ? It is not. Those two sides do not correspond. Is EH congruent to ST? Yes, those two sides do correspond. Is angle E congruent to angle S? Yes, they are in the same spot in the figure and have the same angle measure. Is angle H congruent to angle T? Yes, they have the same spot in the figure and the same angle measure. Now let's try filling out a few. Which angle corresponds to J when I map triangle JHI to congruent figure NPO? Which angle corresponds to J? Angle N corresponds to J. I can see that if I rotate the figure, angle N is where angle J would be in the image. Which angle corresponds to I? Angle O corresponds to I. What angle corresponds to H? Angle P corresponds to H. What side corresponds to JH? NP corresponds to JH. What side corresponds to HI? PO corresponds to HI. What side corresponds to JI? NO corresponds to JI. Select all the statements that are true. Is angle P congruent to angle W? No, those are not corresponding angles in this figure. Is angle O congruent to angle W? Yes, those are corresponding angles. I can see that if I rotated triangle NOP to be triangle XWV, O and W correspond. They're the same. Is angle P congruent to angle V? Yes. Is angle O congruent to angle X? It is not. They do not correspond. They are not in the same position. What transformations could map KLMN to PSRQ? Again, this figure could be rotated counterclockwise to create the image. Now select all the statements that are true. Is angle M congruent to angle R? Yes, they are corresponding angles in congruent figures. Is angle N congruent to angle S? Yes. Is line segment MN congruent to line segment RS? Yes, both of them are 34 feet. And is angle K congruent to angle P? Yes. All of these statements are true. Is MK congruent to XY? No. They are not the same. They are not corresponding sides. Is angle M congruent to angle W? Yes. They are corresponding angles and they are congruent. They have the same measure. Is LM congruent to XY? No, those are not corresponding sides. Is angle K congruent to angle X? Yes, they both represent the right angle in the triangle. Is angle P congruent to angle U? No. Is angle O congruent to angle U? Yes. They represent the same angle in the triangle after it's been rotated. Is line segment ON congruent to UV? Yes. They represent the same side after the triangle has been rotated. Is angle O congruent to angle W? No. They have different measures and they are not corresponding angles. Let's look at one last set of figures. Is angle B congruent to angle K? Yes. Is line segment DA congruent to line segment MJ? Yes. Is AB congruent to JK? Yes. Is BC congruent to KL? Yes. All of these represent corresponding sides and angles. You've done a great job with this video. Now go to IXL Practice P9 and try to get to a SMART score of 100.